Welcome to a new episode of the brand called You. I've brought many accomplished people to you over the last year or so. Today, I have a friend, someone who's achieved a lot in journalism, someone who's written a lot of books, and someone who's an economic analyst. Pranjal Sharma, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Glad to be here.
When we were talking just before we started, you were telling me you had 3 avatars. And I'd like to cut straight to the chase and say, tell me about the 3 lives that you've been through and where are you today?
Thanks. So I like to say I'm in 3 careers because I started with print media. And in many ways, my career coincided with the economic reforms journey of India from 1990-91. I spent almost more than a decade in print media with publications like Economic Times and India Today Group. And it was quite fascinating because suddenly there was a huge demand for people who could write or understand and talk about economic changes and business issues. Even something like we used to have things like the Capital Controller of India, which was a body which would decide the stock prices of companies who were going to the market. So one has seen that. And then, thanks to again that the liberalization in media happened with the private broadcasters were allowed to operate. And again, today it's difficult to imagine, but at that time we just had the national broadcaster to view across various options that they served.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had an option to join that broadcast sector because media was transitioning to video and broadcast, and that was a natural thing for me to do. But that ended too as well, and I have now in the last few years been on my own, and I like to say that I'm in the category of educated unemployed. And even the first part is often in question, but it's also allowed me to do a lot of different things because I've been freed from the tyranny of organization. I think the joys and the tyrannies of an organization. So it's a third career is a phase where I'm also trying things which I never thought I would do, planned, unplanned, anticipated, and unanticipated. So here's where I am.
Wonderful. So let's start with the first part of your career, which is say as a journalist. Over the past 2 decades, what in your opinion are the changes that have taken place in journalism? And why I'm asking you this is because I've often written myself that the age of superstars in any career, whether it's the corporate world or whether it is the medical world or whether it's the journalist world, that seems to be dying out now. What are the changes in your perspective that have taken place?
Superstars, the difference today is that earlier superstars stood on a platform. So it was a platform plus the personality, and that created the superstars. And if you were to remove both, you would often find that once the so-called superstar was removed from the platform, the personality or the aura around that person also, literally halved because they were no longer on the platform. And I think that's a very important lesson in general as well, Ashutosh, because oftentimes we tend to believe that we are the organization that we work in. There is a positive side to it because you own what you do and you want to be as passionate about it. But at the same time, if you start mistaking the organization for yourself and feel that you are everything and the organization is you, that's when a problem begins.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we are in a far more, so again, there are 3 parts to this media transition. Right. So we had very credible media organizations which grew from, traditionally from pre-independence era to I would say till the 90s, till the end of 90s, very solid print organization, which grew, which were modern and which were progressive. Then, of course, broadcast came and we moved to a completely different platform. But the whole piece about Superstar is also today that we are seeing a far more democratization of information and news and media which is coming through. There are good parts to it and there are not so good parts to it. So the transition, as you asked, is really that from a limited number of media delivery platforms in multiple languages and in, I would say, broadly print and broadcast, we have now moved to digital, which has brought consumers directly in touch with what is happening on the scene. To that extent, it's terrific. But the role of an editor here is very important. And you have a very strong corporate background. You will understand that what is the role of an editor. I also call the editor a news manager. What does a news manager do? There is information coming out all the time from various sources. The editor has his own ground force that is getting the information based on certain protocols and processes. These are essentially filters. And when information is finally converted and processed, it becomes knowledge or a news report. It is presented. So when you as a consumer get it, either in print form or broadcast form, it is being vetted to some degree. And there is some responsibility and ownership of the information which has been given to you. So even when there is a mistake, you know that you can go back and correct it and double check it or verify it. And a very old adage in media has been, news media has been, when in doubt, leave it out. If you're not sure about it, don't talk about it. So that piece has shifted. And that's where the negative part comes in, where while we have moved from a point where maybe half a dozen or a dozen organizations decided what was news to maybe 100 million people deciding what is news.
Correct.
But the problem is that those 100 million people don't have those filters in place. So we are not able to assess what is correct, what is not correct, what is being vetted, what is genuine, what is not genuine, what is opinion, what is manufactured. So while there is a lot of debate about fake news, the natural part of it is that because everybody feels, well, this is happening in my neighborhood, so it must be happening across the world. Let's put it out. And then people feel, well, if it's happening in a neighborhood, the entire city is let's say if there's flooding in one colony of one city, and somebody says, well, the entire city is flooded. Look at this video. You assume that the entire city is underwater. But in a news organization, the perspective would be there, context would be provided. So while there is a democratization, there's also a weakening of filters. So we are going through this transition where over time we will have to figure out a way that in a social media context, how can we bring back filters so that people are in a better position to assess what is genuine and what needs to be discarded.
Well said. And I completely agree with you. But my a follow-up question to that is that when I was growing up, I had to form all my opinions based on the editorial that I would read or the news item that would come in the newspaper that I was reading. Today, I have the ability to express myself through social media. So I'd love to get your thoughts, because my view is that social media has democratized news for the common man.
So absolutely, I think you're also alluding to the views part of it. So in media, there are two very significant pillars, news and views, and there was always a wall between them. And there's a third part, which is the revenue-oriented activities, which was the second wall. So if you look at any news organization, there are three pieces: news, opinions, and the revenue generating, and there are walls between each. Right. Of course, editorial collectively is news and opinion both. Now, opinion again is divided into the editors of the newspaper who take an opinion or a position on a particular issue, and that's what you see in the editorials. Correct. At the same time, on the editorial page, there could be comments and columns by other people who could take a counter view. So that itself is split. So what it enabled you as a reader to do is to say, well, this is one opinion, this is another opinion. You are in a position to process it and say, well, my opinion in this, which could be completely divergent from what was, or maybe an amalgam or a synthesis of what has been expressed into opposing views. Initially, in the early years, the only way you could express it by writing a letter to the editor in the hope that it gets published. But today, you can go out there and post your views on any social media platforms, and depending on your influence and your connections and people who know you, you will find the right kind of attraction to it. So yes, there is a lot of democracy in views as well. See, everybody had views. So even when you were growing up, Ashutosh, the views that you formed were partly because of the media, but also were partly influenced by your atmosphere and your immediate personalities around you, your family, your colleagues, your peers. And therefore, the thoughts that formed in your mind were a combination of all that. And of course, the opinion pages played an important role. I think a similar process is still on today, except that the points of information that we get are far more. So even if you had a view on a certain subject earlier, maybe you could, chat with 10 people. Today, you have the views of 100 people, looking at you, and you have access to that simultaneously within 10 minutes of an event occurring. So I think it's really a lot of, it's not just quality, but also the quantity impact which we have to process.
Absolutely, and well said. So, Pranjal, let's move to your book. In fact, two books: India Automated: How the Fourth Industrial Revolution is Transforming India, and then the second book is Z Factor. Let's talk about India Automated first. Tell me about your hypothesis for this book.
It occurred, there's a book which was published before this. It's called Kranti Nation, and that was inspired a little bit by the whole definition of startup nation, how Israel describes itself. And Kranti, the way I saw it, is really is an acronym of knowledge, research, and new technology in India. India missed out on the industrial revolutions. If you remember, in the centuries ago, India was actually a very strong manufacturing base. We had a great shipbuilding industry. We had a terrific textile industry. And during the colonial times and the British Raj, there was an active effort to destroy them, not just through economic measures, but literally physical measures. Looms were destroyed, and we were made to be dependent on imports. And the whole narrative today of exporting raw material and importing finished goods was artificially created. We were exporters of finished goods.
Yeah.
And therefore, the subsequent revolutions which happened, we missed. It's largely the industrial revolution. And then when we found independence, we had a socialist structure, which also meant that government decided everything. And, there may be real imperatives why we had to go for that at that time of the era. But effectively, our own abilities were never allowed to function. Now, the whole concept of fourth industrial revolution happened in recent times, where after the invention or the discovery of steam engine and electricity and computer chip, the connected world, which the fourth industrial revolution presents, which is really an umbrella term for everything from robots and automation to drones to precision medicine to AI, etc.
Right.
I had been part of several conversations at the World Economic Forum where this phrase was being discussed in relation to what's happening in US and Europe. And it struck a thought in me that, what about India? What's happening in our part of the world? And that led me to start talking to my friends and people I knew in the industry to say, well, what's going on? And many turned back and said, well, actually, we are using some of these technologies. So that led to the creation of the first book, which said that fourth industrial revolution and the world's best technologies are available in India. Not just available, they're being deployed by some of the biggest business houses as well as startups. So India Automated is a second part of that journey of transition. I like to call it a chronicle. It's really a case study. It's a collection of case studies of how people are using it. Not just in the private sector, Ashutosh, but also in the government, and which is the fascinating part that, state governments and municipalities are experimenting with drones and blockchain and various things. Just because they feel that there's something in there, they don't really quite understand it, but they're trying various pilots which are happening. And honestly, there's no one entity in the country which would probably have a great visibility. So the attempt was really to show that automation is rising in India. Automation is equated to robotics only, but it's also about process automation. It is also seen as a negative force wherein jobs are taken away. My hypothesis was that automation is rising. It has negative effect, but it's also bringing efficiency, transparency to several aspects of our lives, both from the government delivery perspective to the products and services offered by private companies. So while it does have a negative impact, the question is, how do we prepare for it? Because we want the positives out of it, but we have to mitigate the negatives.
Correct.
So the book also argues in terms of saying that let's work towards what can be done to mitigate negatives and further accelerate the positives.
Very interesting. And it's very heartening to note that you're saying that these emerging technologies are now being accepted across the country, including by government agencies.
Absolutely, Ashutosh. It's happening. The point is that state governments, officers, municipalities, all are aware that something is happening. Now, the engagement between private sector and government is not just happening at the national level, it's happening at multiple levels.
Right.
So startups are now, governments are far more open to working with startups. It's not ideal yet, but, a good idea comes, somebody says, well, let me try a pilot project on this. Every officer at every level has a little bit of freedom in terms of taking discretionary decisions. And I think some of the good officers are taking that and saying, well, let me try to see whether can I use a drone to lay a pipe in a certain neighborhood of a city. If it works, it's fantastic. Somebody says, why can I use face recognition to check whether there is attendance of students and teachers in school? Now, of course, there could be an argument, well, you're undermining privacy and all that, and enough protocols are not in place. But my view is that you have to start somewhere, go for it, see what are the goods and what are the bads, and then try to build the guardrails around them.
Wonderful. So one more question, you've obviously done a lot of research on what's happening in our country as far as the fourth industrial revolution is concerned. But I keep hearing from a lot of people that countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia are really taking away the opportunity of manufacture, something that India has wanted to do. Why is India not being able to attract so much manufacture?
So that's I think we're in the middle of that debate right now, Ashutosh, especially in a post-COVID and a post-conflict with China world. I think this is a very big question that the country is facing. I think over the last few years, while manufacturing was encouraged, at some point our competitiveness didn't match the standards. And competitiveness is a factor of two things. One, of course, the infrastructure and the facilities and the regulatory ecosystem that the companies perform within. And I think that's not kept up pace. While we talk about ease of doing business and the rankings have improved, I think ground level situations have not yet met the expectations or the perception that has been projected. And I think work is on that front, but still much needs to be done. Yeah. Second is, I think for various reasons, I hold the industry responsible too. I think our industry for various reasons has always been low on the risk-taking side. While we have a great tradition and great instincts of entrepreneurship, it's also was access-based entrepreneurship. And that has hampered the willingness of companies to take risks and to innovate or to invest in research and development. And therefore, our competitiveness has not improved to the extent that it should. Companies would prefer to get a license. Their first instinct is still, if I can get a license and I can stop other 4 guys from getting a license, I'm in a better position. Then I'm safe. For me, that is market creation. Therefore, I think we have to struggle on both ends, forcing the government to open and also stopping the industry from not allowing the government to open. So there is also a counter force in the country. So while at a public level, a lot of industry leaders would say that, well, we should open up, but actually they said open up every other sector, but don't open my sector. And, this was seen in media as well. Even today, Ashutosh, I can speak from media sector's perspective today, that news on radio is still not allowed. Only Akashvani, which is the national broadcaster, can offer news on radio. Now, in today's age where, information is available on your phone to 500 million people who have internet access on cell phone, I think it's quite pointless. Even today in broadcast news, we have foreign equity caps and regulations. Part of that is also, some argue that it's important because other countries don't allow it, so we should not also. But the broader point I'm making is that India is not a manufacturing base simply because both the government and the industry have failed to create the right kind of atmosphere for it.
Right. Very interesting. So Pranjal, moving on, you do a lot of work with the World Economic Forum. I have been to Davos several times, but that was in the 90s. Over a period of time, how has the World Economic Forum evolved?
Davos has completed 50 years of its events this year in January 2020. 50 years were completed, and I was there as well. I've been affiliated and involved with the World Economic Forum events for about 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, I joined the Global Agenda Council. I'm not a employee, but what they created very, very sensibly is an extended brain trust of people, which were categorized according to their interests, their abilities, and their domain expertise.
Yeah.
And they always meet and they come up with issues and matters which are then scaled up to a larger level. So while it started as a very small club of Europe and America oriented business leaders, it has evolved quite interestingly to becoming a far more widespread body. I think it's also a reflection of how industry has changed from working only for profit for itself and its shareholders. Industry realizes that stakeholder capitalism is an important aspect of what they do, and that's what the founder, Professor Klaus Schwab, has always argued and has been arguing now in the last few years, saying that business is not for itself. Business is is playing a role in the betterment of the society, and I think that's still a narrative which is not seeped through yet. I think 2008 was a very important turning point when we saw that absolute greed led to situations which was not justified. So because capitalism got a bad name and it still is trying to get out of that terrible reputational knock, I think we are in a position where bodies like the World Economic Forum, who have over the decades built terrific networks with policymakers, global business leaders, social leaders, to say that can we build a new narrative around growth, where growth is far more inclusive. Earlier, issues of inclusive growth was seen as a far left propaganda or a very, very social NGO kind of perspective. But today, I think the most or many business leaders realize that it's an important piece. So today, I think World Economic Forum has come to this piece of stakeholder capitalism. Moreover, I think they have moved from a purely achievers club to those who are or achievers club who are maybe in their 40s, 50s, and 60s or older, to creating other communities. So they have created a community of global shapers, which are people in their 20s. They have created communities of young global leaders. They have created communities of innovators, of scientists. In the end, it also is driving home the point that businesses, which was the original club, have to work with all these constituents to work together, because you cannot just be working in isolation and hope that the world will take care of themselves. Because if the companies are focused on consumers, they have to be involved in the consumers' lives as well.
Thank you. That was very well said. So, Pranjal, I have time for a couple of quick personal questions for you.
Sure.
First question is that, over the years, have there been any people who had a strong influence on your life? And if yes, what have you learned from them?
So, Ashutosh, I would not want to identify any single individual. Of course, parents, because when you grow up, your value system is baked into you in your formative years on who you are, what you want to be. And I think that is something which I'm very grateful to my parents. And I think all of us have absorbed terrific value systems from our immediate surroundings. But over the years, what I did is that whenever I admired a trait in a person, I tried to emulate that and absorb it. So no one person is perfect, including you or me. So whenever I found something which is exciting, which I thought was relevant, I admired that person for that particular trait, see if I could follow in that footsteps. And over the years, I think I have been able to grow by trying to pick up little pieces from different people and see if that can apply to me and if that can make my own growth more meaningful.
Very interesting. And my last question to you, and that is, as someone who spent so much time in journalism and who's, achieved a lot and is a very senior person, what would your advice be to a lot of young individuals who are starting their careers as journalists, more so now, as you said earlier on, about there not being any kind of way to vet the news or to have any kind of gatekeepers, etc. And in the name of so much, in a world with so much fake news, what should they be looking at as to build their careers?
There is a statement which I live by, and I think that's very important, not just for students of media, but I think all students and perhaps people like us as well, which is my simple advice is try being informed rather than being opinionated.
Okay.
Which means that go for the facts, question, and get into what's going on. Don't live on borrowed opinion. It's very easy to say, well, I heard that person say that this is bad, so I think it's terrible and I'm against it. But where is your own critical appreciation of it? Where is your own critical thinking on it? How have you been able to check whether that opinion, what is the ground for that opinion? There has to be some fact on it.
Right.
So opinion without fact is prejudice. And my advice to everybody getting into media or any professional, because I think even those who are joining the corporate world, need to know what is the context they're working in. So if you're not informed, then you can't make an informed opinion. If you don't know whether a certain product will sell or not, it has to be rooted in the consumer context. So therefore, both for news as well as for management, students and practitioners, I would say that facts are very important.
Pranjal, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on my show, and good luck with everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Ashutosh, and wonderful being here.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.